Welcome to segment number 4 of the V-2 build series. In this segment, we'll be attaching the completed fin assemblies to the airframe tube. We're going to start by taking a closer look at the aft end of the airframe tube. This is the aft end. We know that because this is the join line between the upper and lower sections of the airframe tube. I want to bring your attention to 4 lines that I've highlighted with a pencil. These are some rogue lines that the vendor who engraved this particular mold misinterpreted on one of the drawings. Fortunately, they lie beneath the fin joint in each of the 4 cases, so I just left them there and didn't have them removed from the mold. What we will need to concern ourselves with, though, are 4 small round positive areas on the tube. These are the location marks for the forward end of the fin attachment. And I recommend that you circle each of them with a Sharpie. I'm going to do the same here. When we're done with that, we're going to take the nozzle component and insert it into the aft end of the airframe tube. Then we're going to do a rough lineup and center one of the forward fin locator marks that we circled with the Sharpie with the midpoint of the gap in the aft nozzle component. We're not going to glue in the aft nozzle at this point. That's because we need to be able to turn this to adjust it at this point. We've zoomed in a little more closely for this next step. This is one of our completed fin assemblies. We're going to locate the break point right here where the root transitions in direction, and it's also the thickest part of the root. We're going to place a small pencil mark right there at that point. This is where the lower edge of the fin will intersect with the lowermost point of the airframe. If that sounds a little clunky right now, don't worry about it. We'll put it on the airframe here in a moment and it'll make sense. Okay, we've zoomed back out. Now we're going to place the fin in the gap of the nozzle and line up the forward end of the fin with the dot that we circled with the Sharpie. That's how the fin is going to fit onto the completed model. Here we've moved in a little bit more closely, and you can see the pencil mark we placed a moment ago aligns with the lowermost point, the aftmost point of the nozzle insert. That's the proper forward and aft positioning of the fin component. Let's mix up some epoxy now. We're mixing a small amount of 5-minute epoxy here. I'm just using a piece of notebook paper as a mixing surface. And I'm using a Q-tip, actually a generic Q-tip from the dollar store, as a tool for both mixing the epoxy, and I'm also going to apply that into the root of the fin using this as well. We're going to use 2 different types of adhesives to mount the fins. We're going to put the epoxy in the root of the fin, and then once that sets up and dries, we'll go back with some Plastruct and do the edges. So it'll be a 2-step process. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm taking the epoxy and I'm starting at the pencil mark and moving up. And I'm going about 2.5 inches. I'm not going all the way to the top. So I've applied epoxy from roughly this point to this point. Set that to the side. Bring the airframe tube back into place. We still haven't glued in the nozzle. We're not going to do that yet. We place the fin root at the base at the nozzle, bring it down, and align that with the circled fin locating point we indicated earlier. Now we double check our positioning. And we wait for 5 minutes. Okay, our epoxy has set up. Now what we're going to do is seal the edges of the fin onto the airframe tube using some Plastruct cement. Rather than use the brush that comes with the Plastruct cement, I want a little more control than that. So I'm using an old paintbrush dipped into the Plastruct. I'm just going to paint that along the fin airframe joint. What solvent type glues like this Plastruct do is they actually melt the plastic. If both of the plastic surfaces melt, as the solvent in the adhesive evaporates, they solidify again and form a very strong bond. You'll recall we still haven't glued in the aft nozzle assembly. We're going to do that as the very last step after all 4 fins are in place. I'm going to flip this around and do the same thing on the other side of this assembly. Okay, we'll give that a few minutes to set up, and we'll do the other 3 fins. Okay, we now have all 4 fins in place, and we have one more step to do before we move on to the next step. I've got my Plastruct cement here and my fine point brush, and I'm going to glue in the nozzle now. And I'm going to do that by just painting along the seam between the airframe tube and the nozzle insert. And capillary action will draw the adhesive in and cement that piece in place. Do all 4 sides. And we're done. Let's move on to the next step.